Detective Lance pulled up in front of the farmhouse, marveling at the way the corn rattled in the fields. The corn was wrong, he could tell that right away, and Lance could honestly say that he had never seen corn look that way. The husks were brown, the corn inside turning black as it rotted on the stalk. He had been impressed by the amount of corn surrounding the farmhouse, acres of skeletal stalks that made the farmhouse feel like an island in a dead corn sea. The police cars out front looked out of place in the dirt yard, and as he mounted the stairs, one of the rural cops came out to meet him. Lance was on loan from the nearby precinct, and the clock was ticking. He had about 36 hours to find anything that would lead them to 5 missing people. They needed his help in discovering what might have happened to the Murphy clan. "Bring me up to speed," he said, nodding at the man as he came onto the porch. He looked like any other state trooper, his coat trimmed in fur, his hat leaning into something more cowboy than law enforcement. He tugged a pack of smokes out of his pocket and lit one, the smoke curling up against the rafters of the porch as he assessed the big city detective they had called to help. Whatever he saw, he seemed unimpressed, and his smile was more than a little mocking. "Well, well, by all means, sir, let me fill you in on what us bumpkins have managed to turn up." He flipped open a spiral notebook and started flipping through the crumpled pages. Lance didn't much care for his tone, but he held his tongue as the trooper flipped through the notes. The county Mounties had been working the case for about a week, and had no idea what had become of the small farm family. The report said that the Murphys, 2 adults and 3 children, had suddenly vanished from their large farm. They'd also disappeared right around harvest time, leaving their cash crop in the ground. This made their sudden vanishing act all the more confusing, and Lance was eager to get his teeth in this one. Let's see. On October 23rd, their closest neighbor noticed the crops in the field had changed. They said it appeared that frost had killed all their corn overnight and just left it to rot. This was at odds since it had never gotten below 50 degrees on any given night recently. They came to check on the family and noticed that they were gone. Last time anyone could remember seeing them was on the 12th when they came into town to buy pumpkins for the kids. The children were out of school for the harvest, and they were getting ready to bring in the corn when they suddenly vanished. That's all we know, and that's why we called you in. I think the sheriff hopes a fresh set of eyes will prove useful. Have you found anything inside? No blood or bodies, if that's what you mean. We've found nothing to make us consider foul play, and no signs of robbery either. There's no reason at all that they should have left their house, and their vehicles are still there too. So, unless they walked out on foot with a kid under 3 and 2 under 18, we have to assume that they were abducted for some reason. Lance nodded, thinking over what they knew and adding it to the small amount that he assumed. With kids present, there was a pretty good chance that it had been a kidnapping. This was the Midwest, and it wasn't uncommon to have a whole family get picked up by traffickers, or worse. The location of the farm would mean that it would make it easy for them to disappear without notice. All the corn would mean that their crime scene would go unnoticed, even if they tried to run. They would likely never find the Murphys, not alive anyway, but Lance had to try. He was one of the department's best detectives, and he had a lot to live up to. "Show me the house. Let's see what I can find." "All right, but we've pretty much gone over this whole place with a fine-tooth comb. I'm not sure there's much else to find." After an hour and a half of searching the scene, Lance feared he might have been right. The farmhouse had 3 rooms. One was clearly a bedroom. The other one was a big room for the kids. The third was a big open room containing a kitchen, a living room, and a sitting room. The home was pristine, recently clean and freshly swept, and everything looked far too orderly for a kidnapping scene. The dishes were done. There were clothes laid out for the next day. There was no sign of a struggle or a fight, and Lance couldn't figure out how they had been taken so neatly. He was searching the kids' room, looking for anything, when he came across the journal. It was nothing, just a salt and pepper mead notebook left on the floor as if it were a tent for natives. It was the most out-of-place thing in the house, and it stood out to Lance for some reason. He couldn't have said why, but his eyes tracked back to that book no matter where he was in the room. As he left, he scooped it up and took it with him as he went back to the living room. Lance opened to the page it had been left on as he walked up the hall, reading what appeared to be an entry for October 10th. "Daddy's mad. Someone keeps stealing our scarecrows. They just disappear out of the field, and Daddy's getting pretty upset about it. He's certain that Dale is stealing them, but Dale swears it isn't him. Scarecrows are pretty heavy, so I'm not sure how he could steal them by himself. The field looks so empty without them, It's just corn as far as the eye can see. Sometimes I stand on the porch and just watch it wave in the breeze, hearing it rustle as the stalks chuckle together. It used to be comforting, but it's a little creepy lately. The rustling makes me think of a monster moving in the corn, and I've spent less time in the corn by myself. Hopefully, whoever's stealing our scarecrows will get caught. That way Daddy won't be so mad all the time. It was signed, Register Murphy. Register Murphy had been the middle child, Lance remembered, as he flipped to the next page. He was supposed to be about 8, and by his writing, Lance could believe it. It read like a typical child's journal, but Lance found himself intrigued all the same. If the kid had seen something, maybe he'd written about it in the journal. Something like that could help him narrow down the culprit or even a motive. Lance furrowed his brow and turned to the next page. There was indeed a visitor, but it wasn't the one that Lance had expected. October 11th. There was a surprise in the field this morning. Daddy was standing on the porch this morning when we came out to work, and he was scratching his head as he looked into the east field. Standing on a brand new post, its body turning rapidly, was a brand new scarecrow. It was dressed in a dark blue suit, a tall top hat on its round head, and the head was a small orange pumpkin. I thought maybe he was turning in the breeze, but then I realized that there wasn't any wind. The corn was still, and the usual rattle was gone. The scarecrow just kind of moved on its own. It danced something smooth and graceful. His arms were boneless, his legs kicking freely, and as the post wiggled around, he continued to dance and sway. I thought Daddy would be mad, but he seemed pretty happy about the scarecrow. He thinks it's funny, a dancing scarecrow, and he says it'll bring luck to our crops. His mother told him a story about a dancing scarecrow that brought rain and grew the corn 30 feet high. As he told it to us, I could see that it meant a lot to him, and he thought it was a big honor to have a dancing scarecrow in one of our fields. We were farming in the field he was in that day, and I couldn't help but watch him as he danced and swayed. Daddy seemed real happy, smiling every time he looked at the thing, but I was a little creeped out by it. I was working close to it, and I couldn't help but notice when it turned its head to look at me. The greasy face was far too lifelike, and it seemed to linger on me every time it got close. We brought in the corn, but I dreamed about that dancing scarecrow last night. It was dancing right in front of me, its mouth screaming as it twisted. Its dance became more and more violent, straw flying as it flailed around. Its screams started sounding like laughter, and as it fixed its eyes on me, it started to whisper, "He comes! He comes! He comes!" Who is this person he's talking about? What'll happen when he comes? Register Murphy. A dancing scarecrow? What the hell was that? Lance wondered. Had the kidnappers been dressed as scarecrows or something? There was no way that one person had kidnapped 5 people and spirited them away with no one noticing. Lance turned the page and read the next entry, seeing a pattern as the young boy laid out the days before his disappearance. The more he read, the less childish it sounded. The longer he read, the more it sounded like Register Murphy was detailing the worst days of his life. October 12th. There are 2 of them now. The new one is dressed in a yellow suit with a matching hat, and despite looking brand new, it looks like it was colored with pee-pee. They stand side by side in the fields, kicking their legs and swinging their arms, looking like they're trapped in a windstorm. Daddy clapped when he saw them, saying that this was exactly what he wanted. The story said that more scarecrows would show up, and I almost shook when he said it. More scarecrows? How many more? There were 2 kicking and dancing, smiling their greasy grins as they wiggled around. I was working alone in the east field today, picking the fields as far from the scarecrows as I could, when I heard them whispering. They were talking, just like they had in my dream, whispering about coming or whoever he was. I heard the corn rustle as it came over in the row next to me, and suddenly there they were, both of them dancing, spinning in the air like typhoons, and I could hear them whispering and screaming all around me. I covered my ears as they swirled, and when Dale found me crying, they were both gone. As I lay in bed that night, I heard them rustling amongst the corn plants, their bodies lashing wildly against the corn stalks, and the sound they made my skin crawl. October 13th. Daddy's gotten weird. When I came out to work today, he was talking to the scarecrows. There are 3 of them now, one of them in a blue suit, one in a yellow suit, and the newest one in a gray suit with a matching top hat. They were all side by side in the east field, dancing and swaying as they held Daddy with their black eyes. They seemed to be gently swaying, not the usual violent dancing they do, and they almost seemed to be listening to him. Listening or talking. He didn't help us today. We all went to work in the fields, picking corn and packing produce, but Daddy stayed with the scarecrows. He looked strange out in the field in his sleeveless t-shirt and his sleep pants, and when Mama went to go talk to him, he told her to go back inside. We were all on the porch carving pumpkins when she came back. Even Thomas was hacking away at his pumpkin's face with a butter knife, and Mama looked scared. She said that Daddy just wasn't feeling well, and when all the pumpkins were lit, he was still standing out there in the dark, talking with those scarecrows. I heard them out there dancing again last night, but I never heard Daddy come back inside. Register Murphy. Lance flipped back and read the last bit again. His dad, Marcus Murphy, was acting strangely. That could explain why his family had suddenly just up and disappeared. Maybe whoever these scarecrows were, they had help from the father. It was too soon to tell, but it was a working theory. That would explain why the vehicles that the family owned were still here. If the people running those scarecrows had their own vehicles, they could have disappeared easily without a trace. He kept reading, wanting more information, hoping for some other clue as to what had happened. October 14th. Daddy was still in the field, and so was a new scarecrow. He was in a green suit, and it looked like it was woven out of grass. All their heads are pumpkins, but unlike ours, they don't look squashy or attract flies. They just sit up there and smile and stare and look real creepy. Mama's worried about Daddy. All she does is sit at the window and watch him while he's in the field. He just stays in the field for some reason, listening to the scarecrows and talking with them. He moved around the cornfield sometimes, not picking or boxing, but just walking around aimlessly. Dale and I have been doing most of the work, but sometimes I can see the scarecrows following me. I felt like they might get me when it was just the two of them, but now there are four, and it feels like they might trap me out there. They grin at me from out of the corn, watching me work, and when I try to tell Dale about it, he just tells me to stop being a spaz. Last night they were all over the field, and I had to put my head under the pillow to stop from hearing them. They sound scary, and their whispers are even louder now. They say he's coming, and that he's gonna get us. I don't know who he is, but I don't want him to get me. If he's as scary as the scarecrows are, I don't want him anywhere near the house. October 15th. Daddy's gone, but there's a new scarecrow out there now. This one's dressed in orange, and it matches the pumpkin he wears as a head. Mama told us to stay inside and went to go look for Daddy in the field. She couldn't find him out there and told us all to stay inside today. It started to drizzle a little, and while Thomas watched TV and Dale read, I sat by the window and watched the scarecrows. There are 5 of them now, and each of them are dancing just like the others. The rain doesn't hurt their spirits at all. They sit out in the rain and dance and sway on their posts, rustling the corn and sending streams of water flying off when they crash against them. It's weird, I wouldn't swear to it, but they look closer to the house somehow. Like when Daddy stood out there talking to them, they seemed farther from the house. Now I can see the rain as it slides off their faces. They're not on the porch, but it feels like they're close enough to throw a rock through the window if they wanted to. Thomas doesn't like them much. He came to sit with me and he said they were scary. He says they came and looked in his window at night, and he always hides and cries until they go away. I never checked to see if they came to my window. Maybe tonight I'll stay up a little and wait to see. This was looking more and more like a case of psychosis. The father had a break from reality and had done something to his family. Whatever this dancing scarecrow nonsense was didn't matter. It was pretty clear that something was going on with Marcus Murphy. Something tickled at the back of his mind as he read, though, and Lance couldn't help but think about something a friend had been telling him about. The scarecrows, the constant use of he, reminded him of Stephen's case. He shook it off, though, not wanting to muddy the waters with a different case. He called over one of the officers and asked if they could see if the family vehicles were all accounted for. He wanted them to check into places on the property where bodies could be hidden, like a well or an old drainage line or something. He suspected that the bodies had been easy for Marcus to move after they were dead, and wanted to know if there was anywhere on the property that they had found blood. "Nowhere, sir. There's not even a slaughterhouse. Marcus grew corn for the ethanol plant. Corn's pretty much his only crop. A lot of farmers out here grow mostly corn, and Marcus used every acre he had for his corn crop." Lance nodded. "What about a basement? Somewhere he might have taken them to kill them?" "No basement. Barn's clean. House is clean. The men are searching the field for anything that might be suspicious." Lance let the officer get back to it, noticing the deputy he had talked to when he came in, eyeballing him as he spoke with a large man in mirrored sunglasses. He returned to reading, seeing the possible sheriff nodding his head in his direction. They likely wanted to know what he knew, but he wasn't ready to tell them just yet. He didn't have a full picture, but he suspected it might be fuller than theirs. October 16th. "Someone smashed our pumpkins last night. I can see them on the porch through the windows. Their guts have been scattered all over the porch, and their shells are lying across the yard. Daddy's still missing, and Mama won't let us leave the house. We found her on the porch this morning, and when Dale helped her inside, she sounded like something had scared her half to death. Dale didn't want Thomas and I to hear, but Mama said we needed to hear about it nonetheless. As she drank the coffee that Dale had made for her, she told us about how Daddy had called her out to the field, but it hadn't been Daddy. She had been woken up by the sound of him calling her name through the window. She'd seen someone standing there, their silhouette tall and broad like his had been. He had called her by name, and then moved towards the field as she went out in her nightshirt. The fields had been dark, the corn lit only by the silvery moon overhead, and Mama had followed the sound of crunchy husks underfoot. She could see him as she walked, and had hurried to catch up with him, but then the corn on either side had started rustling. Something was to her left, her right, behind her, and Mama felt hemmed in. She stopped following Daddy, and that was likely all that had saved her life. It seemed he had been hiding the sickle somewhere out of sight, and when he turned to slash her, she was farther back than he thought. Mama ran, bumping into one of the scarecrows as she careened into the field. Daddy was hot on her heels, and she ran blindly as she tried to lose him. The scarecrows popped up randomly as the rows of corn swung by on the ghostly rails. Her legs burned and her face was wind-burnt as the stalks battered against her. She ran for her life, running on pure adrenaline. She didn't know how long she had run. She didn't know how far, and as the sun peeked up over the horizon, she collapsed on the porch in a heap as she prepared to be killed. When she opened her eyes again, it was morning, and Dale was helping her inside. There are 6 scarecrows now, and the newest one has a white suit and hat. They're all out there dancing now, swirling in the rain and rustling the corn plants. I think I can see Daddy out there if I look closely. He's still carrying the sickle, and there's something over his head, though I can't tell what it is. I'm scared. I don't understand what's going on, but I know we won't be going back into the field anytime soon. October 17th. Daddy is stalking the house from the fields. The new scarecrow, number 7, has a light pink suit. Most people would say it's supposed to be cute, but not me. It looks like old blood. Mama's standing at the window, watching Daddy as he peeks at us from the corn. His head is covered by a pumpkin now too, but it's not the same as the scarecrow's. His head is already starting to wilt, the pumpkin looking sad as he looks out through the eye holes. Thomas is crying, and Dale looks mad. He keeps pacing around, holding the old hatchet he used when we went camping. He keeps snarling out at Daddy like he's going to do something, and Mama seems worried that he will. It's getting dark now. I hope we make it till tomorrow. If you know something, Detective, it would be best if you shared it. Lance looked up from his notebook and into the reflective lenses of the sheriff. He was immensely fat, his belly pressed against his duty belt as he loomed over Detective Lance. He was grinning, but it was clear that his intentions were less than friendly. He was used to cowing his inferiors into doing what he wanted, but he might have overestimated his pull this time. Lance was not the sort to be cowed so easily. If I should learn anything that I think you need to know, Sheriff Leebrook, I'll be sure to let you know. Leebrook grinned, and Lance could see every one of his tobacco-stained teeth. That ain't quite how things work around here, hoss. We called you in on this one. That means I'm here to help you. That doesn't mean I work for you. Now, if you want me to be efficient at my job, let me work. Leebrook put his hands up and backed away, still smiling, but clearly not liking being rebuffed. Sure, you're the big-time detective after all. Lance looked back to the journal and continued reading, the cops now giving him a wide berth as they moved around him. October 18th. Dale left. He and Mama argued about it for hours, the two of them shouting in the back like they thought Thomas and I couldn't hear. Thomas has been crying in the living room, but Mama never came back out. Dale disappeared into the corn, the 8th scarecrow seeming to turn to the side to admit him. This one's wearing a black suit, making him look like a reaper. When he turned back to look at the house, I could clearly see the scowl that was sketched into his face, making it look different from the rest. It's dark now. I can see my breath as it steams out of my mouth. Thomas is shivering, and Mama still hasn't come out of the back room. I can see the ice swirling on the glass. The corn outside is rattling differently tonight. I can hear the ice breaking off as it hits the ground. The scarecrows are very close now. I can see them in the dark, the moon casting their shadows across our home. The shadows slide greasily into the farmhouse, and I moved Thomas away from them and put him to bed on the couch instead. We're both wrapped in one of Mama's old Afghans, but it's so cold. It's almost hard to write. My fingers are so numb, and I don't think I'll be able to write much longer. Someone's coming out of the corn, someone on a horse. Daddy's with him, Dale too, and he's wearing armor like a knight. He has deer antlers on his head, and there's an axe over his shoulder. I can see his eyes. They're red like coals, and they're burning under his helmet. The closer he gets, the more frozen the windows get. I can't see anything now. It's too icy, but I can hear the clip-clop of his horse's hooves. I know I should be scared, but the cold is sinking in, and I'm getting tired. Thomas has stopped shivering, and I think I'm going to close my eyes for a few minutes. Lance felt his breath hitch as he read the last entry. The handwriting here was cramped, almost illegible, the scribbles of a child who was learning to write. He stood up suddenly, taking the notebook with him as he went for the door. The big-bellied sheriff tried to step in his path, but Lance sidestepped him, never stopping. The sheriff cawed angrily behind him, but Lance was out the door and across the dooryard before anyone could stop him. They would never find the family, no more than they would find any of the others who had disappeared under similar circumstances. As he drove away, he was already on the phone with the only person who might be able to use this information. "Steve, it's Lance. I've got something you need to see. I think I might have more information about your Green Man case." I'm an Uber driver in the Atlanta area. It's a great place to be an Uber driver, and there's always someone who needs a ride somewhere. I spend 6 hours a day in college classes, another 8 sleeping, and the rest of my time shuttling people to and fro around the Atlanta area. I've been doing this for about 3 years, and in that time, I've seen it all. I've had drunken frat boys that threatened to kick my ass when I wouldn't give them a ride. I've had annoying, nagging passengers who've constantly made me want to pull my hair out. I've seen the occasional cheating spouse hoping not to get caught, the local celebrity on their way to an event, the online influencer who thinks they're way more important than their subscriber count would suggest, just to name a few. I've had my fair share of funny moments too. The man and his potential lover who met his wife on the sidewalk, the two ladies deciding to go get a drink after they had thoroughly screamed at him, never gets old. And I've also had some scary times. The lady with the neck wound who nearly bled out in the back of my car after her boyfriend just pushed her in and ran off came to mind, for certain. Despite all my experience, though, this story definitely falls under the weird category. Well, I guess we can upgrade it into the scary category, all told. Any night where I almost lose my life can definitely be called scary. This happened in October, about a week before Halloween. My girlfriend and I live in a duplex near campus. I've lived there for about 4 years, and she's lived there for about 6 months. We were taking a semester off since none of the classes we needed were available in the fall, and on the night in question, I was hurrying to get ready so I could drop her off at the airport before I started working. She was going on a weekend trip to see her parents in Virginia, and I'd have the house to myself all weekend. I was a little skeptical about her destination, but I decided to let her dig her own grave if my suspicions were correct. Maybe it was all the extra time I was spending at home, but I'd started to notice that something was a little off about her lately. She'd been fired from her job recently, and though she kept saying she was going to get another one, I didn't see her making any effort to do so. All she seemed to do was talk to people on Discord. She'd gotten really into this local group, spooky stuff from what I'd seen, and she was constantly chatting and texting with them. I was suspicious, but I wasn't really worried. At that point, I figured the worst she could do was dump me. We chatted on the way to the airport, talking about what she'd do once she got there, and how much she would miss me. She bemoaned how bored she would be at her parents' house, and when we arrived at the airport, she kissed me goodbye and headed into the busy terminal. As she left for her parents' house, or wherever she was going, I decided to get some work in, since I was at the airport anyway. I pulled into the temporary parking area and signed into the Uber app. The airport was usually an excellent place to find fares, and sure enough, someone was trying to get a lift. He wanted to go to a hotel nearby, and after agreeing to the ride, I moved back into the concourse to pick him up. He was a big dude, around 6 feet and muscular. He had a bag, which he put in my trunk, and a smaller bag which he kept on his lap. I asked him where he was going, and he verified the address, so off we went. He was pretty quiet the whole way there. He looked cramped in my back seat, like a sardine in a can, but he took it well. Mostly he just played on his phone, typing away to someone as we rode in silence. That wasn't uncommon, and I honestly preferred clients who weren't chatterboxes. There was nothing worse than trying to hear your GPS over some drunk backseat DJ who wants the aux cord, or some tourist who wants a guided tour of the city as you dodge rush hour traffic. We drove for about 20 minutes before pulling up outside the hotel without much fuss. I told the guy we'd arrived, and he quickly slipped the phone into his carry-on and offered to tip me for arriving so quickly. I said it wasn't necessary, since that sort of thing was usually handled through the app, but he went ahead and slipped a 20 up next to my headrest, and I took it with thanks. Rules or not, money is money. He asked if I'd pop the trunk, and when he had his suitcase, he thanked me and walked towards the front of the building. I was getting ready to check the app for fares in the area when I heard a noise from the back seat. It was that high-pitched ding noise that so many phones use for notifications. And when I looked in the back seat, I realized the guy had forgotten his carry-on. It had slipped into the floorboard, and I could see the black light on his cell phone through the mesh. I dug out the phone and started to reach for the door when my eyes registered what the message on the lock screen had said. A picture of a pretty blonde was next to the message, and she was asking if he'd gotten to the hotel yet. Another popped up to say that she was running a little late, but she'd be there in 5. She couldn't wait to meet everyone, and she was so glad that she had finally done this. And it was about time they all got together, and the picture was of my girlfriend. I just stared at the phone for a few minutes before someone honked at me, and I drove into a parking spot. A cab had just pulled up behind me, and as I parked, I couldn't help but notice when my girlfriend stepped out and walked to the hotel. She still had her suitcase, her furry boots, her parka, the leggings that she had left the house in, and she smiled hugely as she looked at the hotel. She clearly hadn't seen me, which was good because I had about 1,000 questions I would have likely bombarded her with. She was supposed to be on a flight to Virginia, but instead, it looked like she was meeting some random guy from Discord. Was she cheating? Cheating seemed to be the most obvious answer, but why? We'd never had any problems. Our relationship had been smooth since the beginning. Why now was she... The phone dinged as another message popped up, but this one was from a different guy. "How many have arrived?" he asked. My girlfriend responded, "5, master. Damien seems to have lost his phone, but he's here too." I had meant to check for fares in the area, but instead I found myself watching the phone as the messages rolled in. I was in full information gathering mode now, and anything I could come back with would help me in the long run. If this was a misunderstanding or something, I wanted to know before I melted down on my girlfriend. As it stood, though, it was beginning to look very sketchy. I couldn't open the phone, of course. It was one of those fingerprint lock ones that wouldn't open without a password or a fingerprint, and since I knew neither, all I could do was watch the dialog boxes come up. The boxes only stayed for a couple of seconds, and often the messages were too long for the boxes to contain the whole thing, so I was forced to read a little at a time. What I read made me think my initial suspicions might be off. At first, it looked like she was meeting people at a hotel for an unspecified event. As I waited, I saw other people approach, their faces matching the images on the app. I was pretty sure that these people were the ones she was waiting for, because their arrival at the desk was followed by confirmation that someone else had arrived. After 8 or 9 of them had gone up, they began talking to the mysterious Master. The more they talked, the more I realized that this wasn't a weird sex thing. The group started talking about the Ascension and the altar site, to which he responded that they would learn more tonight. He asked my girlfriend if the sacrifice was ready, and she informed him that it would be there when the time came. He quoted some verses that sounded pseudo-biblical, and referred to them as the Coven several times. The more I read, the more I began to believe that she might be part of a cult instead. I sat outside the hotel for several hours, and as it got dark, he told them that the preparations were taking longer than expected. He told them they should meet him at the altar site and sent directions, which I got about half of. He told them to be there before dark, and like a flock of birds, they came from the hotel and moved towards cars parked in the parking lot. I ducked down, not wanting to be seen, and I watched as she got into a late-model black sedan. The sedan drove away in a convoy of other vehicles, and since I didn't have all the directions, I cranked my car and followed them. As they moved out of town and got onto the highway, I tried not to make it obvious that I was tailing them. The freeway was busy. It's close enough to end-of-day traffic that I can hide in a crowd, but as we left the interstate, it became harder to blend in. As the sun sank, I saw the turnoff for the access road, their cars kicking up dust as they rumbled down the gravel road. I didn't want to lose them, wherever they were going, so I pulled off the road for a few minutes before following. It turned out they were heading for Panola State Park. As I drove down the bumpy outlet road, the sun started to set for real. The trees started leaning in on me like hands in a funhouse, and the road was so narrow that if someone decided to leave, I'd be in for some trouble. The darkness had swallowed my car before I reached the end, and all at once, my headlights created beacons of light in the encroaching blackness. The park was beautiful during the day, but in the late night shadows, it had a spooky look to it that only wooded areas in fall can pull off. I suddenly had Blair Witch flashbacks as I trumbled through the spooky backdrop. My girlfriend was definitely into some weird stuff here, weirder than even my imagination could have conjured up, and I knew that I needed to get her out of there before things got bad. When I reached the end of the outlet road, I found a dark parking lot with several cars in it. It must have been a campground at one point or another. I could see a bathroom and a picnic area off the parking lot, and the lot was flanked with lights that no longer seemed to work. I turned off my lights and got out of my car, but when no one immediately came out to get me, I figured they had moved on. I snuck around the building, and sure enough, they were bathrooms. One was a men's room, and one was a women's room. Both were unlocked, but the doors had that broken-into look. Someone had set up a couple of tents in the shadowy space between the building and the forest, but so far I'd seen no one. As I took a step towards the tents, however, a bright light sprang up to my left, and I saw a large bonfire crackling in the woods. It was off to the side of the campground, and for a moment, the sudden flash left me glare-blind. When hands caught me under my arms and dragged me forward, I was momentarily unable to fight back. By the time my eyes adjusted to the sudden flare of the lights, I was already close enough to feel the bonfire's heat and hear the chanting of those around it. It had been low at first, but now it had reached a fever pitch as they drew me closer to the fire. I struggled, but the two men who had me were much bigger than I was. I was pretty sure that one of them was the fare I'd had earlier, and we came up just short of walking into the fire. A robed man in a lacquered mask stepped up and raised his hand for silence, the chanting tapering off as they turned towards me. We stood in silence for 30 seconds before the masked man spoke. Unlike the muscle-bound guys holding me, the guy was not on speaking terms with physical exercise. His robes bulged in front, and had I not been suspended between two men, he would have still been a head shorter than me. When he spoke, though, it was apparent that he had power here. This one must be Master. As I told you, as Sister Serenity said, the sacrifice has arrived. Another robed figure moved away from the group and stood beside the fat robed man. She was about my height and had shoulder-length blonde hair. When I met her gaze, I realized it was my girlfriend. I wondered why I didn't recognize her at first, but it became apparent almost immediately. In the firelight, her hair was a frizzy mess as opposed to the straight and silky curtain she almost always kept it in. She looked almost feral as she stared at me, and I didn't see any of her usual warmth there. All of her love or happiness was gone, and she looked at me as though I were meat, like I was something that would bring her joy once I was cooked black and offered on a plate. I was put on my knees before her, and the fat man handed her a silver knife that he drew out of a scabbard like a magic trick. She looked at the knife like she'd never seen one before, and as she returned to reality, she approached me with the blade. I finally realized what I should have seen from the beginning. I was the sacrifice. He'd left the phone in my car on purpose, and even though there was no way she could have known that he'd get in my car, somehow she had. She'd meant for me to be here, for me to be her sacrifice. And as she raised the knife, I had to know why. "Why did you do this? I thought you loved me," I said, sounding pathetic, but still dying to know what this was all about. She looked at me, surprised, before saying, "Because it's why I got with you in the first place. There's always a sacrifice before the coming of winter. The Green Man requires a gift, and it was my turn this year. I had to have someone to give to the fire, and you were there to fill the role." And with that, she raised the knife, and I closed my eyes as I prepared for the strike. When the bullhorn sounded, it scared me just as much as it scared them. "Drop the knife and put your hands in the air. You're all under arrest for—" "Hey, don't move or we'll—" But it was too late. The knife clattered to the ground next to my head, and they all scattered like quail. I was dumped, face first to the ground, unceremoniously, as my two captors beat feet for the woods. The sounds of shouts and boots and the occasional gunshot surrounded me, and I lay still as I hoped not to be shot out of hand. Eventually, a pair of boots came into my peripheral vision, and my hands were jerked back into flex cuffs as I was lifted up so the officers could have a look at me. A half hour later, and I'm in a detective's office with a warm cup of coffee and a recently freed wrist. We've been tracking these guys for years. They come to Atlanta the most often of any of their other haunts, and it leads me to believe that most of them are from here. About once every 3 years, we find a body at the state park. They take their organs, scribble some runes on the Vic, and just leave them there. Usually the animals have found them before we do. You're actually the first victim we've managed to find alive. It's a wonder we found you in time. He told me a lot of things that evening. He told me that this Green Man they all worship, some Eastern European god or something, and how they believe that if they don't make a sacrifice, he'll bring terrible fury down upon them. They always make a sacrifice right before Halloween, and it's always some random person they've probably known for less than a year. I gave him my girlfriend's name and the name of the guy from the airport, but he told me neither one checked out. Both were likely fake names, used to cover their tracks. Despite messaging my girlfriend, all I've received is a notice that the number has been canceled. So that's where I stand now. I'm afraid to go home because she has a house key. I'm afraid to go to my parents' house because she's met them. I don't know who to talk to, where to turn, or how many of our friends are involved in this little cult too. The detective told me to be very careful after all, because while they didn't catch my girlfriend, they did catch somebody. He took me to a little room with a one-way mirror in it and had me identify a pudgy guy in a robe. He was talking to another detective in a very animated way, the man staying calm despite the amount of flailing he was doing. He asked if this was the guy that my girlfriend had been talking to, the one they called Master, and I nodded. The man suddenly leaned forward and yelled at the detective, who sat back quickly despite the man's hands being chained to the table. Spit flew from his mouth as he yelled, even through the glass. I could hear what he was screaming. "You don't get it. You idiots just don't get it. We aren't worshiping the Green Man. We're all here to protect you from him. If this false sacrifice isn't received, then he will come. He'll come and he will kill. You have to release me. The sacrifice must be completed." That was about the time 2 other officers ran in and restrained him, but his message was clear enough. If anyone reading this has any information, I'd suggest you go to the police. These Green Man guys will have to strike again soon. If they believe that their actions keep us safe, if their delusion is something that must be accomplished, then any one of you may be in danger. I was groomed for 6 months, kept safe like a pig for the slaughter, but they don't have time to be so choosy anymore. The Green Man must be appeased, and soon, lest we suffer his wrath. Who knows which one of you might find yourself beside the fire this year? It happened when I was on my way home from the flea market across state lines. I sell things I make out of junk mostly. The term is trash sculptures in the community I belong to, but I never liked that term. Some may call this junk, but to me, they're treasures. I make all kinds of things, from stuff I find at the dump. People, vehicles, animals, whatever catches my eye. They sell pretty good, but not in my home state. I usually end up driving to Sadie's Flea Market, one of these huge, sprawling outdoor markets in Alabama, to sell my wares. The people there love them, and today was the first time in a while that I've come home with anything. I was loading the sitter into the back of my truck as the sun went down. I had made him out of rebar and old license plates. He was definitely unique looking. I had some lookers, but he was a little heavy for my usual crowd. The sitter was what you would call an end-of-the-day purchase, to be sure, and no one was buying him today. I sat him in the back of the truck and grinned as he sorta looked like he was just sitting there, just resting in the bed of the truck after a long day of being on display. With my passenger secured, I cleaned up my stall and rolled out of the parking lot just as it was starting to get dark. The road was busy, but not overly so. It's about an hour to my house through some pretty rural countryside. I never minded. It's a pretty soothing view as you roll along towards the Florida-Alabama line. Most of the route is roadside stands, abandoned buildings, gas stations, and the ever-popular fireworks stand. It's hard to explain, but it always seems so desolate out here. A single pole light shining beside the shell of an abandoned house, an old store that's slowly being retaken by the woods, a rotting cooler that someone had left by the roadside, its mouth wide open and its inside scummy. These were little things that reminded me that humanity had once had hope for these places that are out of the way, and it made me wish I had the skill to use a camera properly. Some artistic type would probably have paid a mint for pictures of some of these things. As I drove, I saw other people getting ready to leave. The sun was setting, and it washed them out in a way that's hard to explain. It's strange, but the setting sun always seems to gray these people a little, making them look like actors in an early 90s show. The sunset seems to bleed all the color out of them, and it's kind of nostalgic for me. It always seemed comfortable. At least, it did until today. As I drove for the state line, the sun turned the trees into a fiery corona, a forest fire that burned on and on until it was snuffed out with the eventual setting of the sun. It started rather subtly. I had chalked it up to the sun, having gone down when I first noticed it. But as I drove past a familiar barn, I had to double take. The barn was old, older than me probably, but it looked like something drawn in a sketchbook. It's hard to put into words, but it just looked flat and unfinished. As I watched, the light on the barn threw only a small circle of illumination, and the yard itself looked grainy and unreal. I watched as a cat scampered across the yard, and he looked like he might be made out of graphite, like graphite lines that had learned to walk and move all on their own. I rubbed at my eyes as I rolled along, pretty sure I was just getting tired. I had been making sculptures and putting together today's pieces all week, and I was probably just starting to feel the strain. A little sleep was all I needed, and once I got home, I could start burning my candle at both ends again tomorrow. The sitter would sit in my truck till I woke up tomorrow morning, and I'd have added another piece or two by next Saturday. I didn't think much of it as I rolled along, until I saw the houses. The farther I drove, the harder it was to just ignore the strange changes in the landscape. I drove past a trailer park, and I could see all the gray lead outlines as the windows glowed. The insides looked like they were lit by bug zappers, that harsh fluorescent light making them seem to crackle. The spotlights made the concrete look porous, almost holy, and the dog resting out in front looked like if he were to bark, it would come out as a word bubble. It was all so very unreal, and I had to look down at my own hands in order to discover whether I too looked like a pencil sketch. I was pleased to find my normal level of realness, and just kept driving as I tried to get past whatever I had driven into. It didn't get bad until I came to the stoplight, though. There was only one stoplight before you got to the state line. It's probably there to allow people leaving the gas station or the liquor store to get back on the highway so they don't get creamed. The gas station had only a single light over the pump, but the inside looked welcoming. It reminded me of that painting, the one of the dead celebrities in the diner, and I was half tempted to turn in when something whooshed up to my left, and I turned to see a fire going on the side of the liquor store. It wasn't much more than a one-room building that sold beer and wine. I had driven past that pink stucco building 1,000 times, but it had an evil look to it tonight. It didn't glow like the trailers or the gas station did, and its face was dark and brooding as the glass reflected the fire on the side of it. At that moment, it seemed the antithesis of the gas station, and sitting across the street from each other, they almost seemed adversarial. The cars in the parking lot were the old rusty sort, pickups and dark-colored Cadillacs and long cigar-shaped constructions. They seemed to hunch around the lot like gargoyles, but as the fire began to build, I noticed the strange people that were feeding it. The store had a cage beside it, something the employees filled with cardboard boxes and trash and then burned when it got full. As I watched, the human-shaped creatures that seemed to be made of squiggly darkness were throwing boxes onto the fire and watching as they burned. The people weren't even approximations of people. They looked like a child's idea of human shapes, the bodies bulbous and the heads lumpy. Their arms were muscled and their legs disproportionately squat. They looked like orcs in the Lord of the Rings books, and just looking at them made me a little uneasy. They were supposed to be humans, but I had never seen anything less human in my life. They looked like natives in an old jungle picture, dancing around a flaming idol, and as I watched, I saw one of them take notice of me. I glanced back at the light, but it was hard to tell what color it was. All three were shades of gray, and as they flipped through, I couldn't tell what I was supposed to do. Something moved in front of that grainy flame then, drawing my attention back to the liquor store. The four of them froze as they saw that I had noticed them, their red eyes glaring as they prepared to run at my truck. Red or green, I no longer cared. I put my foot on the gas and blew through the intersection, rolling up the road as the four lumpy homunculuses watched me go. My tires squealed as they flew up the blacktop. The trees and the buildings we passed had begun to pulsate a little, their lead edges crackling like lightning. The whole thing looked like a Tex Avery cartoon, something from a sketchbook nightmare skit from an old show, and the longer I watched the sky, the less I cared about the road. My eyes were glued to that fuzzy space, the graphite lining sending phosphorescent clarity through the steely gray sky. Something was rising up amongst the clouds, a silver orb of a moon that suddenly and unexpectedly filled me with fear. Then it rolled in the sky, and I was suddenly looking at the eye of some great beast. It swam in that inky space, this perfect orb, and when it found me, I began to shake. The eye looked straight at me, fixing me with its gaze, not blinking as it regarded me, and that regard bore into me. I found myself unable to look away. When the harsh lights and the equally harsh horn invaded my space, I continued to be aware of nothing but that huge blinking moon. Then, suddenly, everything went black and I was left floating in the inky blackness until the beeping brought me back to the waking world. I was in a hospital, arm aching from the IV and head pounding from the wound that had likely landed me there. My sister had been playing on her phone, but she looked up when I started groaning back to consciousness. She stopped me from getting up, and I realized that I only saw her out of the corner of one eye. Thankfully, the other was just covered in bandages, but at the time, it was pretty jarring. My sister filled me in and said she was glad I had come out because no one understood what had happened. According to the man in the moving truck, the one I had scared half to death, I had crossed into his lane as he was driving from the depot. He had swerved, barely avoiding the truck, and he said when I left the road something had fallen out of the back, and he had thought my passenger might have slid out. I had proceeded into the nearby woods before the tree had stopped my progress. It wasn't until he went to check on my passenger that he realized it was nothing but a dented metal doll, and went to check on me. He had helped me out of the truck and stayed with me till the ambulance came, and that was how I had ended up spending the next 4 days in a coma. I don't know what happened, and I can't really explain it, but somehow I slipped into something very different. The road I'd come to know was not what I had driven that night, and I suddenly found myself in a place that I couldn't come to terms with. I tried to tell people that, but they seemed to believe that I might have been drugged, or maybe I had picked up something I couldn't handle at the flea market. They never found anything heavier than Xanax in my system, though. My sister had floated the idea that I fell asleep and had a dream before I drove off the road, but I know what I saw. I saw those things, and I'm lucky to have escaped. So if you're driving the highways of America, be on the lookout for pockets of strangeness, and good luck to you if you happen to slip into one of them. I sighed as I saw the toll booth looming up in front of us. My wife and I had driven down this road 1,000 times in the 10 years we'd been married. It was actually the place we took our first date, and we loved to drive down it on Sundays and feel nostalgic. Despite the number of times we've driven the long and winding route, the toll booth always surprises me a little. It sounds weird to say that our first date was a drive, but I think it was honestly pretty sweet. I'm a photographer, have been since I was 19, and I often shoot weddings and family photos for people in the area. I've got an amazing eye for location, and my photos have been featured in not just people's homes, but also in magazines that debut the beauty of North Georgia and the Carolinas. The Appalachians have been my home since I was born, and I know how to bring out her beauty in my photos. I was 22 and on my way to a wedding when I spotted a car on the side of the road with a young woman sitting on the hood. She waved her hands at me, asking if I would stop, and I rolled down my window to see if I could help. She said her car had broken down and was wondering if I could help her out. I'm no mechanic, and my car knowledge stops at changing my oil, so I offered her a ride to the wedding I was attending so she could call a wrecker. She agreed and ended up hanging out with me the whole wedding. The wrecker couldn't get there for 3 or 4 hours, and I was the only person that she knew. So, in between photo shoots, we talked. I got her some food. Weddings usually have a little extra, and this one was more of a country union than a black tie affair. We sat around and chatted as I took some candid shots. We discovered that we actually had a lot in common, and when the wrecker called her, she told him to just drop it off at her mechanic. I drove her home afterwards and invited her to dinner with me later that week. I know what you'll say, it wasn't a real date, but it meant something to us, and we've considered it our first date for years. We even went back on our first anniversary to put a marker where her car had broken down. It may be a little macabre, but we put a wreath there to commemorate her little coupe. It had died on that spot the day we met. We still keep that wreath up. We stop at it sometimes so we can remember how we came to know each other. The spot where her car died is about 2 miles from the toll booth. The toll booth is an oddity. It's just a random toll booth out in the middle of the woods. You put 50 cents in the basket, the booth is never manned, and you head on your way. I have no idea who comes to collect the money. I don't imagine it makes a lot of it, but it's probably some senator's nest egg for when he gets put out of office. We always keep change in the car for just such an occasion, not minding paying a little toll to see the road that started our happy life. Today, however, I couldn't find 50 cents in the cup holder. It's been a busy week. We just put a down payment on our new house, my wife just started a new job, and I had just finished shooting a big wedding that more than paid for the down payment on the new house. But it left us a little light otherwise. We had cashed in our change jar that sat in the cup holder, something to get us by till payday, and I had forgotten to put more change in it afterwards for the toll road. The drive was kind of our date night this weekend. We had a picnic in the back seat, and we were going to go up to the lake where the wedding had been held. The lake was where we had had our own wedding, and we went there often to picnic or swim or just enjoy a quiet afternoon together. "What's the matter?" Carol asked. I dug a nickel out from between the seats and weighed the pathetic little pile of change. 5 pennies, 2 dimes, and a nickel were all I had managed to find under the seats. The arm hung stoically across the road, little more than a wooden suggestion than a real barrier. I had thought many times that I could probably just drive through it and be done with the stupid thing, but such things were a little too rebellious for me. "You got any change?" I asked, doubting she did, but wanting to be sure. "No," she said, looking through her purse before exclaiming, "Aha!" and dropping another nickel onto my palm. "Well, it's a little better, but it's not quite 50 cents. Just dig some out of the change cup," she said. I shook the cup at her, reminding that we had recently traded it in. "Oh yeah. Well, what shall we do, my dear?" I considered turning around, maybe just forgetting the whole thing, but a new idea suddenly bubbled to the surface. I pulled onto the soft shoulder of the road, the car protesting as much as my wife. I'm sure my car's wheels were going to bog down any minute, The shoulder of the road is soft turf and seed grass, and I expected my tires would spew up earth and stick. I'd have to sheepishly explain to some highway patrolman how I'd gotten stuck then. To my surprise, though, I drove easily around the barrier. I laughed and wondered why I hadn't simply done this before. "What are you doing?" my wife asked, half laughing but also half aghast. "We've given this thing 50 cents loads of times. I think it can give us a pass, just this once." We both laughed as we drove away from the lonely little toll booth, but I think even then, I felt a slight twinge on the back of my neck. I would remember it later and realize I had been warned. We drove down the familiar road, taking in nature's bounty and chuckling at our daring. The trees were ablaze with early fall oranges and deep, healthy greens. The sky was a perfect robin's egg blue, and I just knew that the lake would be wonderful today. We could watch the sunset, maybe have a little fire before going home, and snuggling in bed at the end of a perfect day. It was a good plan, but someone had a different one, it seemed. As we drove, my wife watched the leaves with interest. My wife is an unofficial leaf looker, though she would never admit it, and our house has many pictures of beautiful foliage. As I drove, the roads winding onward, I saw her lift her head from the car window and squint at the passing colors. We were both getting on in years, no spring chickens now, but the look she was giving the leaves was decidedly prudish. It was like an old maid who simply can't believe Miss Tyler let her daughter out in that skirt. "John, does something seem off about the trees?" she asked, sounding perplexed. I looked at the trees, the oranges and reds and greens looking completely natural to me, and I told her so. It does, but it doesn't. It's like seeing trees on television. They look kind of glossy, recorded even. I don't know how to describe it. They just look a little weird. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was seeing things. It had been a long week, and we had been through some pretty stressful times. It was enough to make anyone a little jangled. She kept watching the trees, but I'd put my eyes back on the road, wanting to be there already. We had driven for about another 30 minutes, though, when I had to slow down. Sitting in the road, white and brown with a glossy oak arm, was the toll booth. I stopped and looked around, thinking somebody might be playing a little joke, but there was no one around. The toll booth looked exactly as it had before. It was simulated wood grain, and the walls were painted a dark brown and creamy white. The arm was simulated oak with a glossy finish. It looked exactly like the toll booth, but it couldn't be. Could it? Maybe they thought they'd put up another one, my wife asked, smiling but clearly confused. I laughed a little at that. They were getting a little greedy out here, weren't they? I pulled around this one too, and I watched it disappear in the rearview mirror as we made our way down the road. My wife was still looking raptly at the trees as we drove past, her attention becoming unhealthy. When she asked me to take a look, I glanced over to see the unusual reds and oranges and greens, but something did look a little off about them. Had they become even more vibrant? The foliage looked artificial, almost neon, and it battered against my eyes as we watched them go past. Okay, there's no way you can tell me that was just my imagination. I didn't answer. I just wanted to get to the lake so we could have our picnic and all would be normal again. This was weird, yeah, but it was just a strange phenomenon. We would make it to the lake and everything would be okay. When we drove here next weekend, or the weekend after that, everything would be just as it had always been. I edged my speed up a little, wanting to pass the weird Technicolor trees and get into the deep woods I knew were coming. We had driven for about another half hour when my brakes screeched against the pavement. I blinked. It just couldn't be. I had been driving these roads for 10 years, and it was always just the one toll booth. My wife seemed startled too, leaning forward to look unbelievingly at the little booth. It looked exactly like the other two, but that was impossible. We had passed it twice, and I was sure there was only one toll booth out here. There would be no reason to think a second one would make any difference. There was so little traffic out here. "What the hell?" my wife asked. And when I pulled around the arm this time, it was a little more aggressively than I meant to. Maybe, she started, pausing a little as she looked nervously at me, maybe we should just pay the toll. I didn't say anything. I had been too mad to even acknowledge the prickle on the back of my neck this time. Stupid, money-grubbing jerks. They hadn't figured they could line their pockets enough with just one toll booth, so they had to have 2 more. This was unbelievable. I had a sense of humor about the first one, but if they thought they were going to gouge me for another toll, babe, they had another thing coming. I was going to write my congressman, my senator. I'd write the freaking president about this. They couldn't just, John, gouge people like this. What about tourism? What about local beauty spots? What the hell happened to bringing people out so they could, John! I stopped on the brakes and turned to yell, "What?" at my wife as she stared out the window. Normally, she would have chastised me for yelling at her. I don't think I had yelled at her more than a couple of times our whole marriage, but she was too shaken to even take notice. She was looking out the window, staring at the trees with the strange leaves and pointing with a shaky finger. Look, she stuttered, and I turned to see what she was babbling about. The leaves were still eye-destroyingly bright, but this time they were also melting off the trees. Not regular melting either, but like wet paint dripping off an oversaturated object. I could see them dribbling onto the ground, pooling on the grass as the verdant green lawns became spin-art. I put my eyes forward, racing the engine, and tried to reach what I knew was ahead as fast as I possibly could. The toll booth came into view again, but I didn't stop this time. What are you doing?" my wife said, getting nervous as I didn't slow down. I gunned the engine, revving to 70 on the straightaway. "Stop it! Stop! Don't do that!" The engine growled as I nudged it up to 80. "John!" my wife screamed, but it was too late. I crashed through the wooden arm and laughed maniacally as the wooden pieces cascaded off the hood and flew to either side. I had made a lot of mistakes that day, but damaging the booth, that was the worst one. My wife screeched when I hit the arm, but one look at me had reduced her to silence. I glanced over at her and immediately felt sorry for what I had done. My foot came off the ignition and the car slowly spun to a stop in the middle of the 2-lane road. I had damaged state property. I was sure there was some sort of camera on the booth somewhere, and it would be easy enough to see me ramming the arm. I thought about driving back to the booth and seeing if there was a number I could call to report the accident, but finally I just decided to keep going so we could make it to the lake before dark. As I drove, I realized my wife had been silent the whole time. I turned to tell her I was sorry, to apologize for going a little nuts back there, but she wasn't paying any attention to me at all. She was looking at the countryside as it rolled by. "Honey, I'm sorry about all that. I just let it all get to me. I'm sorry for yelling. Sorry for acting like a psycho. I was just so... The trees are wrong, John." Her voice sounded on the edge of hysteria. "What?" I asked, craning my neck around. "They're all dead. They're all dead, John." I turned right, wanting to see what she was talking about, but when I saw the trees, I wasn't sure why it had taken me so long to see. The trees, so vibrant and colorful before, were now sickly and forlorn. The vibrant colors had oozed right out of them, and the leaves hung limply from the trees as their bark hung pale and peeling. It wasn't just the trees either. The sky looked yellow and sick. It made no sense. What the hell was going on? This was nothing like how the road usually was. It was nothing like how it had looked the first time we'd seen the toll booth. I put my foot down on the ignition and we kept rolling forward towards our destination. It only got weirder the longer we drove. The longer we drove, the more I expected to run into that toll booth again. The longer I drove and didn't encounter that ramshackled booth, the more paranoid I became. The world outside didn't help much either. The sky became darker and darker as we went. The leaves began to drop from the trees in droves. The limbs were skeletal, the bark crumbling from the long, fragile limbs, and the farther we traveled, the more desiccated they became. We should have come to the deep woods by now. We should have come to the lake by now. We should have seen another car, seen a deer, seen something. My wife stopped looking out the window, and I kept sneaking glances at her to make sure she was okay. She just sat hunkered against the seat, rubbing her shoulders as she tried not to notice what was going on outside. I should have been worried about her. I should have stopped to make sure she was okay, but I was feeling on the verge of mental collapse myself. We never made it to our destination. little as I would have wanted to get out if we had. As the sun began to set, I realized how much worse it could get. "Honey," I whispered, not sure how long it had been since we'd spoken. It felt like days, weeks, but my mind railed against this idea. We were just a little lost on a road we had driven so many times we could have set the mile markers. I wasn't sure what was going on here, but I was sure that we would come out of it okay. "We shouldn't have driven around it." "What?" I asked, confused by her answer. "We shouldn't have hurt the toll booth." She turned towards me and she looked afraid. "We should have just paid the toll. Now it's mad, and it might never let us get off this road." "That's nonsense," I said, but it lacked conviction. I had been out here at night before, driving home after a day on the lake, but I had never seen it this dark. The trees no longer looked to be the old pines that I'd come to love. The trees I could see from the headlights looked more like maples, with a thick dark sap running out of them. If I looked too long at them, some of them even seemed to have faces. I always looked away when I noticed this, afraid to meet their gaze, but I could feel them looking at me nonetheless, challenging me to meet their eyes. As much as I wanted to tell her she was wrong, I couldn't argue the fact that we seemed to be stuck, and it had all started after we drove around the toll booth. "Quick, dig under the seat and see if you can find 15 cents. She looked at me in disbelief. "What? 15 cents? That way, if we see the toll booth again, we can pay the toll and get out of here," I nearly growled at her. She moved slowly, like someone in a dream. She began to search under the seats for change, and as she searched, I kept driving. I was beginning to believe that something outside the norm might be at play here, and the further we drove, the more I also believed that we were being followed. The moon hung overhead, the bright yellow moon like a kid's Halloween drawing, and by that popcorn yellow beam, I could see things running through the woods. They loped along like big dogs, their bodies oddly elongated, and their legs thick and long. I never got more than a quick look at them, but that look was enough. I think I see a quarter in the track of the seat, but I can't get it. Can you pull over so I can reach it?" I gritted my teeth, but a quarter would get us there for sure. I pulled over slowly, my lights still glaring into the woods, and told her to please be quick. My wife stepped out, getting down beside the car so she could reach below the seat. I glanced around nervously, watching the woods for signs of the creatures. My wife was saying how she almost had it, but it kept slipping through her fingers. I told her to be quick, and when I looked back at the tree line, I saw one. It was like a mountain lion that had been dipped in tar. It was like a massive cat, with black ridges of overlapping plates. I imagined I could see the headlights reflected off its grinning mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, and its claws clicked impatiently on the edge of the pavement. "Carol," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the creatures. "I've almost got it," she growled through gritted teeth. The creature didn't seem to have eyes, but its head turned menacingly towards the car as Carol spoke. As the quarter came free, I reached down and grabbed her by the collar of her t-shirt, lifting her into the car. My wife isn't large, maybe 5 feet, but at that moment it wouldn't have mattered if she'd been a giant. I pulled her back into the car and pushed my foot down on the accelerator as hard as I could, the door bumping shut as we got back on the road. If I had hesitated even a moment longer, we'd likely be dead. As it was, I clipped the beastie in the side of the head instead of full in the side. The chest of the creature would have caved the front of my car in, but its head whipped heavily to the side as it broke one of the headlights. I barely noticed as I flew down the road at 70, the other creatures in hot pursuit. We were doing 90 as we barreled forward, but I could see the pack of nightmare hounds right behind us. The rear lights lit their chitinous faces hellishly, and I took the hairpin turns with wheel-screeching accuracy. I'm no NASCAR driver, but the sight of those creatures behind me was enough to push me onward. If they caught me, we'd both be dead. If I crashed, we'd both be dead anyway. Seemed like either way, our options were pretty limited. They followed us for a long while, too long for creatures their size. I was driving 90 most of the time, but they kept pace as easy as if I'd been going 20. I was keeping ahead of them, but only just. I felt them bump the back bumper more than once. They seemed intent on forcing me off the road, but they couldn't quite hit hard enough to force me off. My wife shuddered every time we got hit, and I found myself barely able to keep it on the road after every successful strike. After some indiscriminate amount of time, I looked in the rearview mirror to find that we were alone again. A few minutes later, I saw the toll booth come up into view, but not the one I was used to seeing. This toll booth was black, the paneling looking like the skin on those creatures, and the arm looked like an unprocessed tree trunk. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the money into the basket, whispering sorry as the arm slid up to permit us. We pulled through the turnstile, and it was like crossing some kind of barrier into another world. My grandmother had grown up in Ireland, and had sometimes told me stories about people who crossed the barrier between their world and into the realm of Fae. Grandma always said that people could cross into the fairy realm without realizing it, but I knew all too well when I crossed the border out of whatever place we had been in. It was like passing under the coldest waterfall I could imagine. We got home without incident, but it's the craziest thing. We had voicemails from our friends, a client, and even my wife's new job, asking where we were and why we had been gone for so long. It seemed that even though we had left just after lunch on Sunday, we didn't return till Tuesday night. The car's still damaged, so I know we didn't imagine it. The car is damn near out of gas, and the oil shows that it's almost due for an oil change, despite having been done less than a month ago. I don't know what the hell happened to us, but I know I'll be keeping money in the cup holder from now on. Whether we ever choose to go down that road again or not, I will always have money to feed the toll booths that may appear in my life. You never know where they might take you if you don't play by the rules. I hadn't wanted to go to Applebee's, but my friends insisted. I'm not opposed to going out for a meal, but I hate going to Applebee's in our town. It's a gathering place for every half-drunk Chad and happy-hour drunk who doesn't have enough money to drink at the yacht club, but has too much class to go to the Tilted Stool. We aren't big drinkers. I mean, we like to tie on a few sometimes, but these guys get downright sloppy. We get a booth as far from the bar as we can, and it's still so damn noisy in there. By the end of the night, we're all yelling at each other just to be heard over the jukebox or the drunks. I spend the rest of the night with my eardrums pounding and my head ready to crack open. At least that's how it's always been until tonight. So, we're in the back booth, like always, when I see the guy. Mark was talking about some girl he was seeing from work, Frank laughing like a donkey. His latest drink bounced around, threatening to spill as he pounded the table, and I looked up from my cowboy burger, just in time to see this guy hunkered over his food at the end of the row. He was bent over his plate, top of his bald head gleaming, and the light overhead lit him like a wax sculpture. I'm not usually one for people watching, but this guy kinda stood out. He reminded me of a story from Temple, back when I still went with my parents. They told us a story about a guy who'd built a creature to get revenge, a golem, and that was my first thought when I saw this guy. That sounds a little harsh, but I only mean he appeared not like a man, more like the approximation of a man. He had a white button-up, a red tie hanging loose around his neck, and even from here I could see the sweat starting to pool under his arms. Despite the noise, I could hear him almost perfectly, too. At first, I thought he was eating his meal real loudly, bent over at the waist like a dog. But the longer I watched, the more I thought he might be crying. His shoulders were hitching in slow up and down jerks, and he appeared to be sobbing into his plate. I felt a little voyeuristic as I watched him. Poor guy was probably living what was the worst day of his life. He'd probably been stood up for a date or lost his mom, and here I was just watching. When Mark nearly leaned into my ear, I jumped a little when he spoke. "What you looking at, Pally?" He followed my line of sight and found the poor guy before I could. Whew! That's a guy who's got a date with a rope later. Frank turned to look, but winced as Mark kicked him. Don't look! Ain't you got no sense? Poor fella. Kinda looks like this guy that came into the gas station the other night. He comes in high as a kite, and when I wouldn't sell him beer, he just starts crying, and Mark went on, but I wasn't really paying any attention anymore. Felt a little bad for continuing to watch him, but just couldn't turn away. Something about him was mesmerizing. It was like driving past a car crash and being unable to stop staring at the bodies on the pavement. You know it's wrong to stare, but you just can't stop. Frank was braying laughter again, and I could see our waitress contemplating whether to cut him off or not as she came to get our plates. Mark told her he was fine, and Frank ordered another beer. And after several tense seconds and an elbow from Mark, I snapped back to myself and said I was okay too. Geez, buddy, Mark said as the waitress shuffled off. You gonna go over and propose? What are you talking about? I asked, biting into my burger and realizing it was about lukewarm. Had I really been staring at that poor guy as my burger turned to ice? You've been staring at him for like 10 minutes. Thought you were gonna order him a drink for a minute. We all laughed, mine being a little forced, and then Mark stood up and waved to a pair coming through the door. Jim and his wife Celine waved at us in turn, and Frank moved to our side of the table so the two lovebirds could sit together. They had been inseparable since college, and I don't think I'd ever seen one without the other more than a handful of times. They excused their lateness, their sitter had been late, and Jim started in on a story about how she had gotten lost and turned down the wrong road, when I turned my attention back to the poor guy 2 booths down. He was still bent over his burger, still quietly sobbing, but the way his shoulders moved had started to seem wrong. I was no expert on sobbing, but this guy's herky-jerky movements were starting to look like something else. A rational part of me chastised myself for continuing to stare at this poor guy, but I was like a moth to flame now. He was my car wreck, and I was starting to notice signs of foul play. When he snorted loudly, I heard the laughter for the first time. It made me shiver a little as I heard it thrum into me like a badly played piano note. The guy wasn't crying. He was laughing. The more I looked, the more I could see bits of meat and lettuce sprayed over the tabletop. The longer I looked, the more I wondered how I'd misunderstood his laughter for crying. I was now drawn deeper into this web of strangeness. No escape in sight. Crying was one thing. I could understand crying, but who sits in a booth by themselves and laughs? Was he nuts? Some kind of mental case who was off his meds? Watching him from behind Selena's shoulder, I wondered if he might be dangerous. Maybe we should leave. Maybe I should suggest that we change venues, but all thought of escaping fled from me as he lifted his head from that plate. The scream that welled up inside me was cut off by my constricted throat and likely sounded like nothing so much as a sigh. The man's face looked like a fantastic bit of prosthesis. It was like a piece of Halloween decoration that's just a little too realistic. The kind you worry might contain a person who wants to bite. His face looked like the front of a thumb, calloused and rippled with wrinkles or ridges. His eyes were like colorless slits, something slashed into his face with a knife. His nose appeared to be drawn on, like a cartoon character's. He was unreal, something that shouldn't exist in polite society outside of a circus tent. His mouth, though, his mouth was the worst. His mouth was full of long, needle-like teeth, reminding me of an anglerfish as it protruded from his thin lips. Those teeth looked like they would never close comfortably. From here, it looked like they would constantly poke at your lips and gums, and you would be in agony most of the time. There were pieces of meat on those teeth, red raw chunks that had been speared by them, and that's when I looked down at the plate. It was covered in the grisly remains of what looked like chunks of raw hamburger meat. I doubted like hell that the staff had just handed this guy raw beef, but the alternative seemed even wilder. The alternative was that this man had brought his own raw meat from home so he could just consume it here in public. As the horror ran through me like ice water, I looked up to see those colorless slits observing me. The two of us just stared at each other for a count of 5. Then he pulled those thin lips and monstrous teeth into a smile, and I could see red pooling at the edges of his flesh. I glanced over at Mark and Frank, both now sitting on my side of the booth, but neither of them had noticed him. The 4 of them were involved in a conversation like there wasn't a monster sitting 12 feet from us. It seemed impossible that anyone could be having a normal conversation so close to that creature. Its very presence should have triggered some ancient primal node deep in our brains and forced us to either destroy it or flee from it. The 4 of them were talking about jobs and school and Jim and Celine's daughter, while this thing got to exist in humanity with the rest of us. It was too much to handle. Suddenly I wanted out. I wanted to be anywhere but there. I tried to tap on Mark to get him to move or to look up or just acknowledge that I was losing my mind within easy reach of him. But my body wouldn't respond. I managed to flick my fingers at his arm, bumping him a little, but he only rubbed a hand over it as if a bug had landed on him. Celine was talking about the new Pokemon game, and Mark and Frank were just nerdy enough and broke enough to be enraptured by her descriptions. I was stuck in a state of eye contact with that thing, and the longer I looked, the more it seemed to drink me in with those strange eyes. Then, without warning, it began to sink down in its seat, becoming lost beneath its table. I panicked. Suddenly not being able to see it was worse than having it on display. Could it sink beneath our table? How far could it go? How close could it get? I was suddenly imagining the damage those teeth could do to a foot, even a foot within a shoe, and I pulled mine up a little higher as Selena's words washed over me. He didn't resurface for quite some time, and you would have said that such a thing would not have gone unnoticed. Then he slid back up from under the table on the opposite side of the booth. He was grinning from ghastly ear to ear, and he looked like a little kid who's trying to play with the table behind them. There was still a table between us and him, but I was no longer sure how much protection that provided us. I didn't know his mental state, and whether he meant to do us harm or not, but when he dipped back down again, I started shaking. "What's wrong with you?" Mark asked suddenly, turning to look at me as I shuddered beside him. I pointed to the empty plate where the man had been sitting, and Mark looked over before scoffing loudly. "Oh no, your boyfriend left. Don't worry, I'm sure most of those guys at the bar will take you home if you ask them nicely enough." "What's going on?" Jim asked, noticing my discomfort and looking alarmed. "He's obsessed with the guy that's sitting a couple of tables back. Couldn't take his eyes off of him, I swear. Thought he was gonna try to console the guy for a minute. Dude was just sitting there crying, and this freak's over here looking at..." The bald, sweaty head began to surface behind Selena, and when I shouted for her to look out, the whole restaurant went dead silent. Jim and Selena turned to look, but there was nothing behind them. I'd had enough, though. I pushed Mark and Frank out of the way, freeing myself from the booth as I went to go check under the table behind us. He'd be crouching down there, grinning like the little goblin that he was. But as I got down on my knees and looked beneath, I was greeted by nothing but an empty space. The waitress asked me what I was looking for as I moved to look under his table as well, but by then I was already intent on leaving. I got in my car, threw the keys in the ignition, and sped off as fast as I could. Sitting at home now, I can't get that image out of my head. My phone's been blowing up, and I know my friends are worried. I can't make sense of it. What was that thing? Why did it take such an interest in me? Is it dangerous? Did it follow me home? Every time I close my eyes, I see those repulsive needle-like teeth and the no-color slits looking back at me. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything but that creature again.